Thea Stilton, Mouseford Academy. Dance Challenge. Scholastic. Welcome back, mouselets. A cool breeze blew through the port at Whale Island, carrying the crisp scent of autumn along with it. Mouseford Academy was just opening after the long summer break, and Vince Guy Mouse ferry boat was filled with chattering students. They were thrilled to be back with their friends again. "Come on, Mousellings," called Pamela, scampering off the ship with Colette, Nikki, Paulina, and Violet. "I have a feeling lots of Fabumouse surprises are waiting for us this year." "You said it," Nikki said. "I can't wait to check out the creative writing class." "And I'm looking forward to my violin lessons," said Violet, smiling. "Mouselets, aren't you forgetting the most important thing?" Colette interrupted. "Of course." Pamela remembered. "The headmaster promised us that we'd have acting, singing, and dancing lessons this year." With a squeak of glee, Paulina grabbed Pamela by the paw. Together the two rodents glided into a graceful tango. "Holy cheese, you're way ahead of the rest of us." Colette laughed. "A special class dedicated to music and theater sounds so fun." "Yes, it will be absolutely Fabumouse," Nikki agreed. "Let's all sign up." Friends together, mice forever, the mouselets cheered. The Thea sisters' enthusiasm attracted the attention of their classmates Tanya and Craig, who were also scrambling off the ferry. "Howdy, mouselets!" Craig greeted them. "So good to see you. What are you five celebrating?" "We can't wait to start that new drama class," Paulina explained. "This year, we'll have something to sing about," warbled Nikki, pretending there was a microphone in her paw. "Ha! Ha! Ha!" Tanya laughed. "So you're planning to sign up, too?" "I've been dreaming about it all summer." Shin scurried over to the little group. "I've been preparing for drama class, too," he said, pointing to the suitcase he was dragging behind him. "I've got all the most important plays from the last 100 years in there. I want to make a good impression on the new professor." "Well, I'm not sure the theater is the best showcase for talent as big as mine," joked Craig, sticking his snout in the air snobbishly. Then he grabbed Violet by the paw and sent her into a series of twirls that made her tail spin. His friends burst into applause, encouraging the dancers. With every twist and turn, they drew closer to Shin's suitcase. Closer and closer, until... Kabloom! The two rodents bumped right into the suitcase, knocking it over with a spectacular crash. Nikki leaned over and gave Craig and Violet a helping paw. "For now, maybe we should just try to get to class in one piece," she said, laughing. The new professor. Violet and Craig had just gotten back on their paws when Ellie Squid scurried up to them. "Come on, rodents, shake a tail. The headmaster is heading this way to greet the new teacher." "I can't wait to meet her," Pam exclaimed. "Professor Ratishnikov is a real celebrity." She and her friends headed toward the small stage that the headmaster had set up to welcome the new professor. "She's directed more than 30 plays and musicals." "She's a true legend," Paulina agreed. "I heard she brought her best assistants to teach us," Tanya put in. "Moldy mozzarella." "I absolutely must find something to wear for the first class," Colette murmured. "If I were you, I'd think twice before changing my whole wardrobe," Colette, a voice squeaked sharply. "A class this exclusive certainly isn't for everyone." The mouselets turned. There was only one rodent who would make that kind of comment, Ruby Flashyfur. The mouselet was sashaying toward them, surrounded by her faithful friends, the Ruby crew. She looked over each of the Thea sisters from snout to paw before continuing. "Of course, you could always try out, if you have the nerve." "Of course we have the nerve," Pamela spluttered indignantly. We'll practice and work hard, just like we always do, Nikki added proudly. But Ruby and her friends just flounced away with their snouts in the air. Throughout this whole exchange, Violet was as quiet as a mouse. She was thinking hard. Her father was an orchestra conductor, and her mother was a singer. She'd heard them squeaking about Professor Retishnikov. Mouseford's newest instructor had been a famous ballerina, and she was known all over the world as a great artist. With a terrible personality. She had a reputation for being demanding and strict and for squeaking sharply to her students and assistants. Violet suspected that Professor Retishnikov's class would be difficult in more ways than one, but she didn't want to alarm her friends until she met the teacher for herself. So she said nothing. "Come on, let's go," Ellie exclaimed. "Professor Retishnikov's motorboat is about to arrive." A strange welcome. Sure enough, a large white motorboat was rumbling into the harbor. All the students were buzzing. They milled around the dock, stretching to get a look at the FAMOUSA director. The entire faculty had crowded nearby. Octavius de Mussis, Mouseford Academy's headmaster, seemed agitated. He couldn't stop pacing back and forth like a cat outside a mouse hole. "Is my tie on straight?" he asked Professor Marblemouse, tugging on his shirt collar. "The stage is big enough, right?" he asked Professor Sparkle, who reassured him for the 100th time. Then the headmaster dug into his pockets. "And my speech? Where did I put my speech?" he cried. Professor Ratcliffe pawed him a few shite ells of paper, shaking her snout patiently. Even the headmaster, am I ready, seems nervous, Paulina whispered to her friends. "Yeah," Colette agreed. "This new class must be really important." Finally, the motorboat docked. A moment later, a slender, elegant rodent with long blonde fur appeared on the gangplank. As soon as the rodent's paws touched solid ground, the headmaster began his speech. He was stuttering with excitement. "Friends, students, colleagues, I am proud to present to you Professor Retishnikov, the leader of our new Department of Arts, Music, and Theater," he squeaked proudly. "This is a new chapter in the prestigious history of Mouseford Academy." The students and teachers all applauded. But Professor Retishnikov didn't even crack a smile. She stepped forward with an air of indifference. Professor Datamouse gave the headmaster an ornately carved box. Professor de Mussis took it with both paws and extended it toward the new instructor. But Professor Retishnikov turned her snout away. "Thank you for everything, Octavius, but I absolutely detest these ceremonies." "You should have known better." The headmaster grew as still as a block of aged cheddar. Before he could squeak, the new professor added, "We have a lot of work to do. There's no reason to waste any more time hanging around here." With that, she strode away, heading for the academy. After a few awkward moments, everyone followed her. An intriguing mystery. "That was weird," Paulina squeaked as she headed toward campus with the other Thea sisters. They were all surprised by the sharp tone the new professor had used with the headmaster. "I wonder what was inside that beautiful box," Nikki reflected. Pamela wondered. "Yeah, me, too." "I'll bet it was a special welcome gift," Violet put in. Just then, a flaming red convertible stopped next to them. It was Professor Bartholomew Sparkle. Pamela seized the chance to ask him about the ceremony. "That was strange, don't you think, Professor?" She was hoping he could tell them a little more about the MYSCBDON Professor Retishnikov. Professor Sparkle nodded. "Of course, none of the staff expected the ceremony to be cut short like that," he agreed. "Though the headmaster did warn us that Professor Retishnikov can be more prickly than a porcupine." "So the headmaster already knows Professor Retishnikov?" Violet asked. That's right, the professor said. I've heard he and Professor Retishnikov were fast friends back when they attended Mouseford together. But then something happened, and she left the academy very suddenly, without graduating. Do you mean Professor Retishnikov quit? Colette asked in surprise. That's what they say, but unfortunately that's all I know about it, Professor Sparkle said. Well, I must be off. I'll see you in class, Mouselets. He drove away. So the headmaster and Professor Retishnikov have known each other since they were very young, but then something happened to separate them, Pamela said slowly. Nikki confirmed. Don't you want to find out what? I'm more curious than a cat. Props in their proper place. When the Thea sisters reached the academy, a large red truck was blocking the main entrance. A crowd of students had gathered, and they were unloading strangely shaped objects. Tanya, Craig, and Shin were among them. Their paws were full of colorful boxes and packages. Mouselets, give us a paw. Tanya called out. We have to carry these costumes, wigs, and props inside. Yeah, we need all the help we can get, said Craig, who was bent under the weight of a large mirror. It looks like we're going to build a whole new theater. As the students struggled with their loads, a rodent with a cheerful snout popped out of the truck. Paulina nudged Colette. Hey, I think that's the new drama teacher, Professor Robert Plotfer. The professor sprang out of the truck. Come on, move those paws, Mousellings, he cried, brushing a lock of fur off his forehead. A few moments later, another new teacher stopped by. It was Professor Rosalind Ply, the dance professor. Professor Plotfer hadn't noticed her yet. He was busy unloading his truck. The young professor glided toward him gracefully. Hi, Professor Plotfer. Good to see you again. Hey there, Professor Ply, he replied, giving her a 30A full of costumes and wigs. You've arrived just in the nick of time. What's this? Professor Ply stuttered, staggering under the box's weight. Lend me a paw, please, I have to hurry. Professor Plotfer said as he scurried inside the building. I just remembered I left the faucet running in my room. I don't want to F100D the academy on my first day. That's Professor Plotfer for you. Asterisk Devies with his snout in the straight sphere. Said Professor Ply. She rolled her eyes affectionately. Like a thunderbolt. The Thea sisters immediately offered Professor Ply their help. I'm Pamela, and this is Violet, Nikki, Paulina, and Colette, Pamela said, taking a box of wigs out of the new professor's paws. Thank you very much, Mouselets, the instructor said warmly. We still need to get settled, but it's a great pleasure to be teaching at this academy. You're part of the new theater department, right? Violet asked, lifting another boy. Exactly. Professor Ply answered. She and the Thea sisters had entered the academy and were heading toward the drama classroom. Our department was created by Professor Retishnikov. She's divided the class into 3 sections, one in acting, taught by Professor Plotfer, one in dance, which is mine, and then there's Professor in ARI, your singing teacher. Professor Ply pointed to Professor Retishnikov's third instructor. A lively young rodent whose fur was streaked with colorful strands stood at the door to the classroom. But before the Thea sisters could introduce themselves, loud music started thumping. The singing teacher was instantly surrounded by a noisy throng of students, pushing their way into the classroom to see what was happening. The Thea sisters and Professor Ply couldn't help but join them. Ruby and her crew had been practicing all morning. They were determined to impress their new teachers, and they had decided to perform right there, in front of everyone. 2, 3, 4, shouted Ruby. In the blink of a cat's eye, Zoe, Alicia, and Connie stepped into formation and began performing a song and dance number. "I can't believe it," exclaimed Pamela, shocked. "This time Ruby has really outdone herself." Are those mouselets your friends?" Professor Ply whispered. "Not exactly," Paulina replied. "Well, they certainly had an original idea," the professor commented. "But I know each student at the school has a special talent inside." Professor Ply smiled at them. "In my class, you'll learn to show your inner grace and agility. And Professor Retishnikov will teach you how best to use your strength and energy. These qualities are all very important in dance. Soon you'll all know how to express yourselves through movement." The Thea sisters exchanged eager looks. The new class sounded really exciting. Meanwhile, Ruby and her friends were still dancing and singing. Then suddenly a firm, strict squeak interrupted them. "Who is responsible for that awful shrieking?" Professor Retishnikov swept into the classroom, with the headmaster trailing behind her. Ruby stopped singing and dancing instantly, as did Alicia and Zoe. Connie was so embarrassed, she hid her snout in her paws. Zoe hurried to turn off the music. Her fur had turned redder than a Gouda cheese rind. An awkward silence fell over the room. All the students were intimidated. Professor Retishnikov looked stricter than a barn owl on a rodent-free diet. The professor stared at the Ruby crew. Then her eyes swept over the rest of the students. "Well, since there are so many students here, why don't I take this opportunity to look you over," she said. "Let's see what we've got." A storm brewing. Professor Retishnikov turned away from the Ruby crew and toward Colette, Nikki, Pam, Paulina, and Violet. "Ah yes, let me introduce some of our finest students, the Thea sisters," the headmaster squeaked. He gestured toward Colette, who bowed nervously. "Yes, very nice," said the professor, examining Colette with a critical eye. "You are rather graceful, but you don't seem to know what to do with your paws." Then she moved on to Violet, who curtsied. "You have the body of a dancer, young mouselet. But what's going on with that arched back?" Professor Retishnikov turned to Paulina, who was twisting her long braid. "You look agile enough, but you must stop fidgeting. And you," she said, turning to Pamela. "Good muscles, but your posture is stiffer than a moldy cheese stick." Nikki took a step forward, thinking she might as well get it over with. Professor Retishnikov looked her over from snout to toe. "You have good paws, but be careful with them, we're not on a SCGGIR field." Ruby Flashy Fur was enjoying the Thea sisters' stunned expressions. Finally, Ruby thought. Someone figured out how to wipe the smug smiles off those mouselet snouts. "Tvi seen enough," Professor Retishnikov continued. "I strongly recommend that you all enroll in my class if you want to acquire any elegance and grace." The headmaster cleared his throat. "Students, you are in for a unique experience. Professor Retishnikov and her class represent something entirely new for this institution, and I'm sure you'll all seize this marvelous opportunity. Yes, you all simply must sign up," Professor Retishnikov interrupted. "For years, my students have gone on to become world-class performers. It's about time Mouseford Academy recognized my talent." The headmaster drew Professor Retishnikov aside. "My dear professor, I can assure you that these students are among your greatest admirers," he whispered. "They're eager to study under your brilliant tutelage." Professor Retishnikov was unmoved. "Are you sure that things have changed so much since she stopped abruptly, leaving the words hanging in empty air. Then she called to her assistant professors and scurried away. The Thea sisters had been standing close enough to overhear this heated exchange between the headmaster and Professor Retishnikov. Colette raised her eyebrows curiously. On the other paw, Ruby and her friends hadn't noticed the conversation between the two professors. They were too busy giggling over what the new professor